Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Metropolis Perspective Sustainability Symposium. I'm Tina Brennan, Vice President of Marketing at Metropolis. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is the fourth year for Perspective Sustainability. This series returned with live webinars, keynote addresses, and tool demonstrations, all to address the future of the built environment during a climate crisis and a global pandemic. Yesterday, we kicked things off with a keynote address by Ed Mazria, the founder and CEO of Architecture 2030, followed by a panel entitled Measuring Progress on Sustainability. If you missed it, you can watch it on Design TV by Sandel next Thursday or on Metropolis's website in the coming weeks. Today, we'll begin with a keynote address by Bill Walsh, founder and strategic advisor for Healthy Building Network. Bill will be followed by a panel on making all buildings healthier, which will feature insights from ZGF and HDR, as well as performance solar shades manufacturer Mecho and Armstrong Ceilings, a manufacturer of ceiling and wall solutions. The webinar will end with a tool demonstration of Matter, a material management platform created for AEC and owners. And we'll be back tomorrow with a keynote from Rachel Hogan of International Well Building Institute, a panel discussion with leading design firms and manufacturers on understanding the whole life impacts of buildings and interiors, plus a tool demo of Tally. If you haven't already, you can register to join us. The registration link will be in chat. Today's panel is CEU accredited through AIA, IDCEC, and USG-BC. If you do not request accreditation when you registered, please send an email to webinars@metropolismag.com. The URL can also be found in chat. We will not be using the raised hand or chat function today for questions or comments. However, we welcome questions at any time using the Q&A feature. Please note that you can upvote questions that you would like to see answered, as those questions will be taken first. Also this year, Metropolis launched the Planet Positive Awards, a first of its kind recognition program to honor projects and products that benefit people and the planet. If you are an architect or designer who has worked on a sustainable project, or a manufacturer who has introduced a sustainable product in the past few years, the deadline for entry has been extended to June 30th. The URL will also be placed in chat. Hosting an event like this requires the support of incredible sponsors. Metropolis would like to thank Armstrong Ceilings and Walls, Carnegie, Dell Technologies, Formica, Mecho, and Tarkett. Now I'd like to introduce today's keynote speaker, who we are thrilled to have speak at this year's symposium. Bill Walsh is the founder and strategic advisor of Healthy Building Network, which has been defining the leading edge of healthy building practice for 16 years, working in strategic collaborations with industry partners such as Google, Harvard University, Perkins & Will, Gensler, Smith Group, to name a few, and green building organizations, including USGBC, International Living Futures Institute, and Enterprise Community Partners. Healthy Building Network is dramatically increasing transparency in the building products industry and reducing human exposures to toxic chemicals, as well as increasing commercial demand for healthier products and creating market incentives for healthier innovations in manufacturing. In 2015, HBN launched Home Free, a new collaboration with affordable housing developers to bring the benefits of healthy building to people who are disproportionately exposed to toxic chemicals at home, on the job, and in their communities. Bill has become a sought-after expert in healthy building, chemical policy, and environmental health, traveling frequently to enlist and assist the allies in this growing movement. It's my pleasure to welcome Bill Walsh.
Thank you, Tina. Let me get my screen shared here. And someone can let me know that that's visible. Are we good?
All good, Bill.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for that nice introduction, and I'm really honored to be here to talk about how we make our buildings healthier and look at some of the challenges and the opportunities that are before us. And I think in order to understand both the challenges and opportunities, it's important to understand and get a perspective on the scale of chemical use in our building materials. Until 2004, for example, the #1 use of arsenic was in pressure-treated wood in our buildings. Today, and I want people to kind of keep this in mind as I speak, the building industry is the #2 use of plastics behind packaging. And more than 50% of formaldehyde in the world is actually used in building products. So you get a sense of this scale of the problem that these present, but also of the impact that we can have when we make progress. I'm going to pick up today where Ed Mazria and the excellent panel yesterday left off, talking about the connection between embodied carbon and material health. We usually focus on occupant health, and we're making great progress actually in reducing exposure to VOCs in our built environment, protecting our occupants from those chemicals. We're not there yet. We have a ways to go. We have other chemicals besides VOCs to address, but I think we kind of understand how that works to a great extent. But I wanted to kind of step back and look at where does material health intersect with the dominant issue we're concerned about today around climate change and bending that curve on CO2 emissions within the time frame we have to meet our climate protection goals. As Ed pointed out yesterday, and I took the screenshot from the presentation, I hope you won't mind, there are 3 material sectors in the building industry that account for over 20% of the building industry's material CO2 emissions, and that's concrete, steel, and aluminum. I want to use the same data when you dive deeper into the study, because you wonder, where does that leave us with interior finishes, for example? What difference does it make in terms of climate and human health in the material finishes we choose for our buildings? So this is a continuation of the same analysis that Ed calls upon, the future of petrochemicals, by the International Energy Agency. And you see the red dots in this chart are basically representing the data that Ed presented. Cement, iron, and steel, those are the 2 highest sources of direct CO2 emissions by industrial sector, followed by the 3rd red dot, which is chemicals. And the study makes clear that when they talk about petrochemicals in this analysis, this is driven by plastic demand, because plastic is, of course, made from hydrocarbons. The blue bars are a very interesting analysis as well. This is what they call final energy demand, and that is the draw on fossil fuels, not just the CO2 emissions, but the total draw and use of fossil fuels that will eventually become CO2 emissions over the life cycle of the product. And here you see chemicals and plastics is the #1 source of final energy demand for fossil fuels. And that's understandable because the plastics and the chemicals themselves are basically oil and gas and coal in another form. So we see, if we think about it, not so much as comparing our flooring or wall covering or ceilings to concrete, steel, and glass, but thinking about the actual material, the polymers and the petrochemicals in our interior finishes, this is a significant sector for us to contribute to reduced carbon, and it coincides with healthier products. Because according to industry estimates, and this might sound incredible to you, but really nobody disputes this, the largest driver of oil and gas demand by 2050 is not going to be energy any longer as we transition to greener energy sources. It's going to be plastics driving all petrochemical production. And in fact, virgin plastic production is projected to grow between now and 2050 at an exponential rate such that we will produce more plastics between now and then than we've produced in the history of the world today. And you let that sink in with all of the problems associated with our plastic consumption, where we are completely on track, not only through projections, but industry investments, nearly $200 billion invested in the plastics infrastructure to make more plastics between now and 2050. And where this really intersects is around equity and environmental justice, because we would never specify, and we've been doing a great job of avoiding specifying materials that off-gas toxic pollutants to the occupants in our built environment. However, the cheap plastic materials that we rely upon today, things like vinyl, luxury vinyl tiles, for example, they may not be off-gassing toxic chemicals to the environment to the extent that they used to, but they are releasing very toxic chemicals into the local environment of the facilities at which they're manufactured and to where they go after the useful life of the product. So the intersection of carbon and toxic chemicals really is around social equity and environmental justice. And addressing that is a top priority of our movement. And that's why carbon neutral is not enough. It's really the kind of the marketing angle of the day. And many people are lured into thinking that buying a carbon neutral product is the best they can do for the environment. But it's simply not true. As this ad shows you from Shell Chemicals, they'll sell you carbon neutral oil. And that's because when you read the fine print, carbon neutrality is often achieved through what's called offsets, which is purchasing clean energy credits, planting trees in South America, et cetera. What we need to do in order to achieve true healthy buildings and true equity is to focus on the industrial process changes that reduce our use of petrochemicals and reduce our production of virgin plastic. And that's where we see the convergence. By reducing our use of virgin materials, our use of chemicals and plastic, the carbon and toxics goals that we share converge in promoting environmental justice and equity for everyone. So before I turn to some of the most important things I think we can all do right now to achieve these goals, I just want to show you what some of the impacts we've had together, working together over the past 10 years that are pretty significant, in addition to providing healthier built environments for our building occupants. I mentioned the use of formaldehyde in building products. 50% of the world's formaldehyde used in building products. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen. And we're seeing dramatic reductions in the built environment of formaldehyde off-gassing because we've reduced the inputs of formaldehyde into many building products. And as a result of reducing those chemical inputs, we see tremendous reductions of formaldehyde released into the local community. This chart shows dramatic reductions in the release from particle board manufacturing facilities, beginning in approximately 2004, 2005. This chart shows dramatic reductions in the formaldehyde releases from residential fiberglass insulation factories in North America. And I don't have to explain this curve to you. What's significant is that today, the industry in North America has transitioned such that no fiberglass bat insulation is made using formaldehyde anymore. So we've seen a complete transformation in that industry away from a highly toxic chemical. And arsenic compounds, this has international implication because when arsenic compounds were phased out of use from most dimensions of pressure treated wood in 2004, we measured the impact by inputs because we were not mining arsenic in the United States. It was coming from China and Chile. So we see international environmental justice objectives achieved through reducing the use of these chemicals in our US building products. So we can have some great impacts when we work together. And I want to now focus on three key areas, I think, that we can collaborate on today in order to continue this trend. First, requiring health product declarations. The HPD is a standard format for reporting the contents of building materials and the associated health hazards. Now, I know HPDs are not that useful to the average architect, designer, or specifier. They're very complex documents, and that's okay. Not expecting you to use them in your daily work, but they serve two functions. Just requiring an HPD has two huge impacts. First, before a manufacturer fills out an HPD, they look at their manufacturing process and they want to put their best foot forward. And we have seen time and time again that before disclosing the product contents, manufacturers make process improvements, reduce their use of toxic chemicals and therefore their emissions that will happen in the built environment and surrounding communities. So simply requiring an HPD is one of the greatest incentives you can provide for a manufacturer to review their process and improve it. Secondly, even though the data are complex and technical and not that useful perhaps to most architects and designers on a daily basis, they're very useful to groups like our organization in helping analyze the field, set strategic objectives, and identify where we have opportunities, such as in the use of formaldehyde in particle board and insulation, to truly transform a whole industry and target all the great work that you do as designers and specifies into this kind of collective action. So we've seen great progress in the past 10 years. There's over 8,400 HPDs now published, publicly available. It represents 20,000 building product SKUs, over 650 manufacturers participating, and a growth curve of 200 new HPDs published every month. This is a great accomplishment for the industry. One of the top things I think that you can do to keep the trend moving forward, because it triggers a whole cascade of improvements in our building products. The second thing I say, call Tim Conway. Some of you might know Tim. He's a VP of Sustainability and the global clients for Shaw Industries. And I bring Tim up as a stalking horse for extended producer responsibility or take-back programs. Tim once told me that on the back of every Shaw carpet tile they sell is an 800 number that you can call to send it back to Shaw. And he had that number forwarded to his own mobile phone and found that it never rings. And that's a real shortcoming of our industry, because take-back programs, having the manufacturer actually reprocess their products, is the single most effective type of recycling strategy that we can employ. And virtually all of the major flooring companies offer some sort of program. I put up the websites for Tarkett, Interface, and Shaw here. So in your practice, to the maximum extent you can, take advantage of these take-back programs. It's the best way to reduce virgin materials use and spur recycling at an industry-wide level. And finally, using third-party product evaluations. There are a number of good ones out there. Cradle-to-cradle certification is a valuable and reliable system. The Red List from International Living Future Institute is a great tool to use. The credits in LEED and WELL and Enterprise Green Communities standards point you in the direction of various product evaluations. I'm going to talk for a minute about what we do at the Healthy Building Network. If you go to the website listed below, you can find this data freely available. We create what we call hazard spectrums that are a red to green ranking of materials in a specific product category. In this case here on the left of the screen, it's insulation. We're not evaluating specific products, but pointing you to the type of material that is healthier. And the important thing about the work that we do behind these evaluations is we always evaluate data from product manufacturing and chemical production. We do not consider a product green if it's not as green as it can be throughout the product life cycle, taking into account the environmental health and justice implications along the supply chain. And I'll close by just giving you an illustration here of how this aligns with carbon and why by reducing virgin materials like plastic usage, we can have less toxic, less carbon emissions, and greater equity. On the left, you see the hazard spectrum that we've done for insulation. And at the top, you see things like cork and fiberglass, which have the least toxic environmental impacts. And on the bottom, you get to the plastics, the polystyrene, and the spray foam insulation. On the right, this is a chart that was developed by Chris Magwood, and I believe it's published by Architecture 2030, in which they look at the carbon impacts of various insulation products and rate it from carbon emitting to carbon absorbing. And you see the alignment here. The least toxic are also the carbon absorbing most preferred from both spectrums. And the carbon emitting and most toxics are also very well aligned. So this is just one illustration. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. If you use less petrochemicals inputs, you are going to both reduce toxicity and reduce carbon. And that's the lesson message I'd like to leave with you today. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity to kick off the discussion that I'm looking forward to hearing more from our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's such a pleasure to have you on today. If you can just stay on for just a second. We have a couple of questions here from our audience. I'm Avi Rajagopal, Editor-in-Chief of Metropolis. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the symposium. And Bill, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. I think it's such a powerful insight, the alignment between health and carbon emissions. We cannot have true climate justice without addressing the impacts, the full supply chain impacts of the materials that we use in the building sector. Thank you so much, Bill, for that. We have a question here from one of our attendees. He says, how does a user of an HPD know that the information provided is accurate and all-encompassing, especially when supply chains can be extremely complex? Do you have a response to that, Bill?
Yes. So the Health Product Declaration Collaborative it works on a third-party certification process. So a third-party certified HPD has a greater reliability than one that isn't using the third-party certification. Now, that is only certifying that the information provided is accurate within the format of the HPD. Obviously, investigations into the specific manufacturing process are very complex. And we're not there yet with total review of every manufacturing complex. But this is what gets us started. This is what gets us moving down that pathway. And organizations like ours, our researchers, then are doing comparative analyses of the reporting, and you can spot anomalies, and you can question. I mean, if there's really something that's that much better, we would all want to investigate that, or perhaps it's not being adequately reported. But baked into the HPD, the great thing about it is an attempt to make the data reporting uniform, so that we're comparing similar units of measure, which is something that was actually quite difficult to accomplish. It's going deeper into the supply chain. And one thing I can attest to in terms of high quality and verifiability is that if a company uses the HPD builder, it's actually drawing on our database called Pharos. So once you populate a chemical into the HPD format using the builder, we will automatically bring forward the associated health hazards. So that type of information, if the builder is used, has a very high degree of reliability.
Absolutely. We also have a useful comment from Christine saying that some larger design firms are wary of designers checking HPD's BS liability preferences third-party certification. There's many reasons to prefer third-party certification here. We have a couple more questions here. We are going to bring our panel on here. So I'm going to ask all our panelists to come back on while we take one more question from Mindy Colley. Mindy says, is there a good way to measure a product's equity impact directly besides looking at basic sustainability and toxicology information? The human impact is a big driver for architects and designers. $1 million question right there, Bill.
Yes, so we don't have single equity measures. So today I would say looking at the life cycle information is a really important indicator, and that's what we try to accomplish through our evaluations. I would predict that in the next 2 to 4 years, we are going to have much better indicators, because if you've been following the Biden administration, it's made a really, I would say, unforeseen commitment to environmental justice with its appointment of key personnel and the establishment of an environmental justice advisory committee that is populated by nationally recognized leaders who have led that movement for 20 years, really. And they're working on priorities for the government in terms of regulations, enforcement, and I've attended their public meetings. The #1 priority that they state is accountability, that we understand the data, that the data are freely available and able to be analyzed and compared. So I believe that coming out of the work that committee is doing will be specific targets that we will start to be able to incorporate into our work. But for today, I think what you want to really be understanding about equity, environmental justice to the maximum extent you can, disclosure is a really valuable proxy for how a company treats the communities in which it operates.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. Again, thank you for that amazing presentation. And we are also thankful for the work the Healthy Building Network is doing. For our attendee who asked about materials for outdoor decking, as well as James Hartford, who asked a question about cellulose and fiberglass for insulation, I urge you to go to homefree.healthybuilding.net, a fantastic resource, a first of its kind ranking of different product types in various building product categories, and really just the unique resource, one of its kind resource in being able to compare broad product types and materials within each category. Bill explained how they come up with that ranking. Bill, thank you so much again. I truly appreciate it. Everyone, I point you to homefree.healthybuilding.net once again. Thank you so much. And welcome to our panelists today. Thank you, Bill. Welcome to our panelists today to join us as we talk about how we can make all buildings healthier. And when we say all buildings, I just want to explain for a second there. As Bill explained, getting to non-toxic, healthy materials is a challenge across our sector. It is an especial challenge when we look at existing buildings and adaptive reuse, which is going to be an upcoming concern, of course, for our industry. It is also more challenging in certain parts of our industry, especially healthcare sector, hospitality sector. Certain building types have a tougher time in terms of being able to negotiate regulations, sustainability considerations, as well as health and toxicity considerations. So there still remain a lot of challenges ahead of us in terms of creating truly healthy buildings. And when we say healthy, we mean not just physical well-being, but mental and social well-being as well. To help us sort of unpack some of the challenges we currently face, some of the strides that we have made in the field, I'm so glad to have with us Avide Hagigi, who is the Associate Principal at CGF. Avide, thank you so much for joining us. We have Eileen Gore, who's the Senior Sustainable Analyst for HDR. Eileen, thank you so much for taking the time out today. Rachel Birkin, who's a Sustainability Program Manager, with Mecho. Rachel, such a pleasure. And Susan Rhodes, who's the Vice President of Marketing at Armstrong Ceilings. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm gonna start with Avide here. Avide, you've been a passionate advocate for healthy materials and for regenerative design. How do you understand the connection between sustainability and healthy materials? And how can designers start to address health at that building scale and look at regenerative strategies when it comes to health?
I was on mute. Thank you, Abby, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and share some insights and have this discussion. Thank you, everybody, for joining. That's a great question. So really the concept of regenerative design is all about restoring, rejuvenating, and renewing the systems within which a building exists. It's really a systems thinking approach to design that essentially eliminates this concept of waste. That is an issue that we deal with consistently in the building industry, is this issue of waste. And we a lot of times we tend to approach it as, there's an issue of waste and there's an issue of healthy materials. And we're not really drawing the connections there a lot of times. But really, if you think of, if you take that systems thinking approach with regenerative design, then we see that there is a connection between healthy materials in buildings and reducing waste, and really creating a system where every output is going to be an input into another system. And it is very much possible to design this way. That's where the concept of circular economy and circular design as well comes from. And I really like what Bill mentioned in his presentation, and it's another connection that I've been seeing more and more of recently, and I've been connecting those dots even in our practice as ZGF as well, is this connection between also healthy materials that don't have as many chemicals and embodied carbon and the lower CO2 emissions. So there's really a trend, and I think it would be great if we can think of this in a circular way, not just healthy materials in terms of the end occupant health, which we have made some great progress on, but really understanding that when we are specifying healthy materials, we're essentially specifying materials that have less toxic chemicals, that are more capable of being reused and recycled at the end of their life, because a lot of these chemicals, you don't want to recycle toxic chemicals into a new product. That is a big issue that we face right now with existing building materials and existing buildings. How do we reuse materials that have high toxic content? We really don't have a way to address that right now. So thinking of it in the sense of healthy materials will reduce our waste, and will also reduce our carbon emissions. And that's really when we get to a regenerative place in design, where we can have, where materials and the built environment can have a positive handprint along the supply chain. And I borrow that term, by the way, from the International Living Future Institute, and they coined this term of handprinting, which I really like, because it's a positive way. Instead of thinking of our negative footprint, we can think of our positive handprints. How can we create positive handprints in the built environment? So I guess I will leave it with 2 points. One is that I do believe that we need to be able to measure the reusability of materials as we reduce toxic content. How much does that increase reusability? And right now, we don't really have a scale to be able to gauge that as designers. And 2, that we need to continue making these strong connections between healthy materials and embodied carbon and carbon emissions, because that's when we'll really make some big progress.
Thank you so much, Avida. And those two directions for our industry are absolutely spot on. How do we increase reusability and recycling, and how do we start to make more connections, as Bill did for us today, between climate change and health. The pandemic has taught us many things. One of them is the intimate connections between climate justice, environmental justice, and public health outcomes. This is not new. It has just been reinforced for us by our experience from the past year. So how do we use that energy and pump it into our work? A quick reminder to everyone in our audience today: we will be taking questions at any point during today's discussion. So if you have a question for our panelists, please go ahead and put it into the Q&A box. We're happy to tackle them. Also, a reminder that after today's discussion, we will have a demonstration of Matter, which is a product management platform for both AEC professionals and building owners. Eileen, I'm going to come to you next. HDR is, of course, has made such huge strides in terms of, both sustainability and the use of healthy materials. But you're also a leader in the healthcare space, which is traditionally a very tough typology to create healthy buildings. And that sounds really ironic, but very often, healthcare buildings are held to such a high performance standard and are so tightly regulated. So can you reflect on your experience, within HDR, working on that typology and others as well, and just talk about what are some of those challenges, at the intersection of regulation as well as sustainability commitments for driving design with sustainability and wellness, how do we resolve some of those really wicked problems where, regulation and our intent to do good kind of are at loggerheads?
Yeah, thank you. Great question, Avi, and thank you so much for including me in this panel. As I reflected on your question when you sent it to me, of course, I think of the challenges in the healthcare building typology, as you mentioned, around what we have traditionally thought of as sustainability, a heavy emphasis on energy efficiency and energy reduction, which is difficult in healthcare because, especially in inpatient situations, the ventilation requirements, the air change requirement thresholds are so high that our architectural efforts in good efforts, important in proper massing and orientation, envelope performance, window performance, just don't have that big of a proportionate impact on the annual energy consumption of a building like a hospital. So certainly traditionally a challenging typology. As we begin to expand our definition of sustainability into more health and wellness, we have more opportunities. Challenges are just opportunities, right? To impact our early design with moves to enhance occupant health and wellness. Something that we are doing at HDR, and I want to springboard off of the energy thought and use what we're doing at HDR is using an energy modeling framework to build annual simulation tools for health and wellness metrics. That is, running simulations very similar to an energy model, but instead of looking at an EUI as the final output, we are looking at metrics that we are designing around, centering around the human experience. So things that you might think of as a health and wellness metric, like a daylight. Well, we're not going to use SDA, spatial daylight autonomy, because ultimately, fundamentally, that is an energy metric, right? We've borrowed that from sustainability and brought it into the health and wellness conversation where maybe we need to rethink those metrics and make sure that they're centered on the human experience. We know SDA is an energy metric because it doesn't have a top end. Any, above the appropriate threshold for minimum lighting, there's no top end threshold. So something more appropriate might be a UDI that has a lower threshold and a higher threshold. Something else we're really considering is the perspective of the metric. So in a patient room, rather than evaluating the entire square footage of the room for view access, we really want to center that on the patient experience. What is the patient getting in terms of access to views to nature, right? From the literal position of the patient's head. Other metrics we might consider more still human-centered, right? The occupant experience, but they're moving. So in our healthcare design, our planners are awash with data about how nurses move through inpatient units. And we can piggyback off of that information and start to analyze, as those nurses move through inpatient units, how often are they encountering instances of biophilia or a vegetated element, right? How often are those nurses encountering views themselves, views to the exterior? What are the thermal ranges that a nurse experiences throughout their path in a normal shift? So we're really trying to shift the conversation from, focusing on percentage of square footage into something that's much more occupant centered, the human experience. And the last thing I want to say about the annual simulations as they relate to health and wellness is, we really need to develop some industry baselines around these conversations of health and wellness and the human experience. Right now, what we are doing is comparing different designs to each other to understand, this unit layout is better than this unit layout by this much in this particular metric. And that lacks a little bit of context, and we're forging some new ground here. But we will need to establish as an industry, what are those baselines that we consider, minimally acceptable for the health and wellness metrics that we design.
Thank you so much, Eileen. First of all, that sounds like such exciting work. Really doing those reviews, taking metrics that come from energy performance and energy modeling and kind of really examining them from a health and wellness lens. That is absolutely fantastic. And it's amazing that you see the healthcare space as an opportunity to do that. And you've added to Aviday's list of things that we need to develop in the industry. We need to understand recyclability. We also need to understand some baselines for human experience. There's some good movement around there, of course. The Well-Building Institute and Fitwell and some of the other certifications in our industry have done some great work in kind of at least helping articulate the frameworks for those baselines. It's fantastic to see firms like HDR forge new paths, as you're saying, in terms of trying to understand, what is the minimum amount of daylight intensity that a space should have based on its programming, right? What is the minimum and maximum exposure to certain materials and elements? So thank you so much, Eileen. I'd love to bring Mecho in here. Rachel, tell us a little bit about Mecho's offerings, that support template well-being, and what you're doing to support the efforts of designers and architects and analysts like Eileen and Aviday in terms of creating healthy buildings.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and including me in this discussion. I'm really appreciative of the time. And, you've really set me up well, because essentially what we're trying to do is create products and systems that help these goals really come to fruition. So for those who aren't familiar with Mecho, we are manufacturers of manual, motorized, and automated shade systems. So when we look at our impacts, it's typically around daylight and materials and how they each impact people and the planet. And as people have mentioned, the perspective of what sustainability is or means to us has really changed over the last few years. Similar to Eileen, with our automated shading systems, when we traditionally looked at the sustainability of automation, right, which is the whole idea that shades raise to allow more daylight in, reduce that artificial lighting loads, was to really focus on energy efficiency. But that conversation is constantly changing and shifting for that human health. And so we're trying to, of course, update our systems and our automation to ensure that we're not just looking at energy, but looking at, the human health impact of daylight. So rather than having that energy metric or energy goal, we're trying to ensure that our systems are meeting your circadian systems or circadian strategy goals. So, we're right there with you. And as shades are pervasive, right? They're in every type of building typology, every type of vertical, whether that be healthcare, education, commercial spaces. And as a result, each of the goals in those different spaces, when it comes to daylight, it really changes and transitions with the amount of daylight people are comfortable with. Is it a transitory space? Is it sedentary? How much daylight can people handle? So we're really looking at all of those aspects, because you want to make sure people have accessibility and exposure to natural daylight, but comfort, of course, is key and most important, right? So how do we balance that? And that's really our goals when it comes to both our systems and our shade cloths. And so we're always trying to innovate and develop and keep pushing the envelope the building envelope, right? As much as we possibly can, because in actuality, shades window shades activate the facade, right? And so, if they're down all the time, you're not getting those views, you're not getting those natural daylight. If you don't have them, it's a hostile building, you're experiencing discomfort. So it's really creating and setting up that balance. Now, one great example is we recently did a case study in the last couple of years with Terrapin, Bright Green, and Craig Galden Davis architects on a school in Baltimore. And what it looked at was biophilic interventions on student learnings and outcomes. And I like to use this example. Window shades were not the only biophilic intervention. We were one of many. And it looked at the impact of student learnings and also student stress levels. And what they, from our side of things, they utilized a daylight sensor in the classroom. So the shade goes up, as often as it can and only comes down when glare is a risk factor. And we also actually printed on the shades itself. So we printed a fractal pattern that mimicked shade tree branches. So it looked like you were getting almost like a tree canopy, right? And so, when you looked at all of these different biophilic interventions, you saw a great impact on both improved learning outcomes and also reduced student stress levels. So again, as Eileen talked about in healthcare, there's different goals in the healthcare, right? You're looking at patient recovery rates, the amount of pain medication, you're looking at nursing. So each of these different verticals have different goals when it comes to daylight. Now, when it comes to materials, we have a whole different set of initiatives that we're really working on, which, go in tandem, but they have a different outline, right? So when we first started with our material health journey, it was really all about, it started in the late 90s, early 2000s with cradle to cradle certification. We used that as our design methodology. And the idea was to create a PVC-free shade cloth. And we did that. It released in early 2000s. It's called EcoVale. It's still the only cradle-to-cradle certified shade cloth with opaque yarns that mimics a vinyl-coated polyester textile, right? Bill talked about the importance of, taking away and eliminating PVC as much as possible. And so that was, our first kind of foray into that material health side, right? But now we've, looking at the different chemicals that are used in shade cloths, another big group that, is, again, pervasive in window shades are chemical flame retardants. Window shades have to pass and comply with NFPA 701. And we realized that, how could we optimize this out? And so a couple of years ago, we released a product called EcoVale Sheer, which was the first commercially available shade cloth that could pass NFPA 701 without any added chemical flame retardants. And I saw some questions about how can you be sure that people are telling the truth? Well, we had that same question. We had clients asking us to literally test our product to prove that we didn't have it. And so my only comment there is communicate with the manufacturer. If you have questions about what's in a product, talk to them about it. We're an open book. We're really trying to foster that communication. If you need us to do a test, we'll do a test. And so, we've started looking at multiple aspects of our chemicals that are used in shade cloths. And, we're consistently, trying to optimize our materials to reduce that chemical dependency. And then, the last bit, and today looking at materials and health and well-being, as we're going back to the office, right? So we want to make sure our products are cleanable, that they can be disinfected, right? That's really important as we're going back to a healthy workplace. And then, we can talk about this another time, but circularity, right? Avida, we just completed our cradle to cradle version for certification. We submitted it at least for our motorized shade systems. And, a big part of that is standardizing circularity. How do we do that? How do we create systems for circularity that foster communication between the value chain so that we can get more communication and we can return products? Or if take back systems aren't feasible, how do we disassemble on site? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there that we can discover.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really interesting that how your journey in terms of how you deal with the impacts of your product has really sort of mirrored that of the industry at large. Moving from thinking about energy performance to thinking about health and well-being, but also thinking about material health and toxicity, and how those three things are connected. And I asked Eileen about regulation, and of course, for on the material sector, fire retardants are one of those intersection points where regulation is often at loggerheads with what is actually good for human beings. So thank you so much, Rachel, for bringing that up as well. Sue, I'd love to bring you in here. You are at Armstrong Ceilings. You're currently engaged with this initiative called the Living Lab, where you are again looking at developing resources or new perspectives on healthier building products, ceilings in your case. Tell us a little bit about that and how ceilings and ceiling retrofits can actually be a tool in creating healthier spaces.
Sure, Avi. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be part of this panel and this group. I'm so excited by the conversation so far and by our keynote speaker, Bill Walsh, Eileen, Avide, Rachel. I've got so many ideas and things I want to collaborate and talk about with you. So I'm excited to be part of this group and talking with all of you out there who've joined us. Here at Armstrong Ceilings, we're just so excited about the opportunity to keep innovating when we have challenges like what we were confronting with over the last year and a half. We have an opportunity to kind of progress further on our sustainability journey, on our healthy building journey. And, we've enjoyed the opportunity to progress and learn along with the industry and to develop new solutions with our ceiling and wall solutions area. But we're really excited now. We took this time to take a little bit of a pause and say, how can we innovate even further with the role that ceiling and wall solutions can play? So during this time when we didn't have many people on our corporate campus, we innovated and created something we're calling the Living Lab. It's an office space that we've retrofitted to take a look at new solutions, technologies, human-centric design for our own teams to return to so we can make sure we're having the healthiest, safest place for our own people to come back and be at work. So it's a part of our corporate campus here in Pennsylvania, and it's really a dedicated innovation and pilot space where we're looking to test out new metrics, Eileen, and new ways of looking at human-centric design in an office sector, and deploying some new technologies and some new innovations and products that have a really strong fit in healthcare, as an example. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We're really looking to integrate elements of more holistically healthy overall interior design with a focus on indoor environmental quality, and really taking ceiling and wall solutions in some places they haven't been before. We're kind of going off of a strong foundation in terms of what the role that it plays in acoustics and clean, sustainable materials. We've been on that journey with the industry to make sure that we have red list chemical-free products, transparent product declarations, EPDs, HPDs, natural types of materials, strongest industry-leading recycling program. But as we look at other elements and we look at the importance of daylight, we look at the importance of indoor air quality and how do we go beyond not off-gassing and not emitting? How do we really look at actively participating in some of the ventilation and design strategies, not just with the energy focused, as Eileen said, but with the focus on human health and wellness, that reassurance that you have constantly cleaned air and that type of element within the indoor air quality. So we put that all together in terms of our Living Lab, and we partnered with Gensler and some other leading players in creating this Living Lab space. It's a 10,000 square foot space that we retrofitted to make sure we could learn and test new ceiling and wall products. And it's now open and a place for different employee groups that are coming back to the office to give us feedback on new technologies and products and innovations that we've put in place there. We're putting in new design features that really go beyond what you would typically think of ceilings for, acoustics, as well as integration with lighting and good lighting and high light reflectance, to think about daylight, to thinking about bringing the outdoors in, biophilic design, indoor air quality in an active way, and thermal comfort in new ways. Part of it is we're testing sensors and a dashboard that help people know what's going on in the space around them, things they can't see that impact their performance and how they feel, with carbon dioxide levels, occupant density, real-time dashboards. And we've brought in some new innovations in the area of the way the air is moving in the space and the way that the ceiling plane, we're learning together with leaders in our industry, interplays with ventilation and quality systems, and really how sealing up the ceiling plane. I think, Eileen, you mentioned like the building envelope and the window envelope and everything you have to care about in a healthcare environment. All of those things, the ceiling plane is, we're finding, is just as critical, not just for energy and making the ventilation systems work right, but how we can block certain types of contaminants, look at particulates, help the ventilation and filtration that ASHRAE and others are really talking about that are important from human health and wellness, not just from energy savings. So we're doing some things in some new ways there with new products that we've launched in the last year called our Air Assure ceiling tiles that help assure it contain and clean the air with by partnering with those air filtration systems. And also with an active air cleaning technology integrated into the ceiling plane with UVC light. UVC light safely done up in the plenum, but integrated into a ceiling format, and our VitaShield UVC panels. They actively clean the air and help with those active air exchanges that are helpful for office, healthcare, retail, hospitality, wherever people are gathered, so they can feel comfortable that they know that we're actively cleaning the air all the time. So we're excited about what this means for what we can learn for ourselves and our employees. We're using it to learn as we develop other buildings on our campus and as we partner with folks like ZGF and HDR and other industry players. But how do we build better interiors? How do we learn together the way all these things come together? It's not enough to be focused on clean, sustainable materials, the transparency, recycling, doing all of those things well. How does it come together with all of us and other manufacturers, and how can we lead together and learn? So I would be excited to learn more about how we can be involved in some of the new metrics Eileen was talking about. And I wanted to build back to something someone else said about the importance of adaptive redesign and regenerative design. Because as we think about existing spaces, it won't be enough to come up with these new design paradigms for completely new construction and new building design. We have to figure out how we look at the existing building stock and how we can transform those spaces to be healthier spaces that people are living and working and playing and learning and healing in today. How do we attack those existing buildings and have retrofit ready types of solutions that take common building materials and systems, partner together, make it easy with the right metrics so you all can specify with confidence, so it can be installed with confidence, and get that combined result that we're really all after within the industry to move the next step forward. It's an exciting journey in part, to be honest. We're just excited to be playing our part, and we'd invite people to learn more about what we're doing here and how we can partner with you on some of our innovations.
Thank you so much, Susan. First of all, I think it's really incredible that, you know, every major product category, every major building product division, you know, we hope that, you know, they start to examine all the ways in which that they're implicated, not just through, you know, material, chemical composition concerns, but rather how they can actively make a difference in the lived experience of a space. And I think that's a common thread between both what you said and Rachel said, but also connecting back to what Eileen and Avide said, you know, is how can we examine, how can we first, as Avide reminded us, take that systems approach, look at the broad systems of a building, understand that we're setting in place sort of the wisest kind of you know, selection frameworks, the wisest sort of decision-making frameworks when it comes to, you know, regenerative and adaptable spaces, and then to narrow down into individual metrics, as Eileen was talking about, and then figuring out how we can improve or sort of achieve our targets on those metrics using products in ways that are not just to reduce the harm that those products might create, to kind of nullify their you know, their materiality, so to speak, but also to positively impact that handprinting idea that Avide spoke about. You know, how can we positively impact the experience of people in the space? And I think that's really exciting to see. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more in just a minute. A reminder to everyone in the audience, we're ready for questions from you. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. I see that our panelists have been responding to some very particular or fact-based questions in there. But if you have any other queries or comments or reactions or suggestions for our panelists, please put them into the Q&A box and we'll start taking them in a few minutes. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Armstrong Ceilings and Wall Solutions, Carnegie, Dell Technologies, Formica, Mecho, and Target. Thank you all so much for making today's discussion possible. A quick reminder, of course, that today's discussion will be followed by a demonstration of Matter, which is a materials management platform for both AEC professionals and owners, and has some amazing integration capacities to very important sustainability and health and wellness databases as well. So we'll take a look at that at the end of today's discussion. And also a quick reminder that our Planet Positive Awards deadline has been extended to June 30th. So if you are a firm engaged in projects that seek to make a positive impact in the world, whether that's through sustainability, whether it's through health and wellness, whether it's through community and equity, please check out our awards program. The link is in chat, and I strongly encourage you to enter. Our intention is to recognize broadly the good work that our industry has been doing and continues to do, and we'd love to recognize your work as part of that effort. So please go ahead and bring your entries in. I have a question for our panel here, and it's building off of the sort of path that Sue opened up for us. We know that while we desperately have to bring down the carbon footprint and the negative impacts of new construction, we can't continue, to foster unhealthy or unsustainable building practices in new buildings. We do have a big challenge ahead of us in terms of retrofits and adaptive reuse. Particularly for interior designers, renovation is the lifeblood of our industry. It's one of the reasons why when Bill looks at total energy demand versus direct carbon dioxide emissions in his graph, we see that chemicals, petrochemicals suddenly have this huge impact beyond iron and steel and cement. And that's because interiors are renovated in the healthcare space every 5 years or so, in some workplaces every 3 years or so now. So we have this constant churn of interiors. And so, strategies for retrofit, adaptive reuse, and renovation are all kind of linked together. And I was wondering if anybody on the panel wants to start us off, and I'd love to hear from all of you in terms of how you're thinking about adaptive reuse, renovation, retrofits in your work. Just reflect on that generally within the framework of course, healthy buildings.
I'd be happy to kick this one off. So, adaptive reuse is something really, important for us because our building products have very long life cycles. So our products can be in a building for 25, 30 years. So when we're designing our systems, we're not just designing for that first tenant. We're designing for the first tenant, the second tenant, the third tenant. And there's different strategies that we use, to accomplish this approach. When you look at the systems approach, right, it's ensuring that when you're building a shade system, if you want to change out a shade cloth, but you want to keep the hardware in there, you can easily do that, right? This is just the simplest way. We have a spline system. So you can just change the shade cloth if it doesn't meet your aesthetic or something of that nature, right? And then we also create accessories, right? So now what we say is you can design buildings with the intent that there will be multiple use types in that space, right? So there's two examples that I can think of for that. The first is we have a product called Electro Pocket, where it's a pocket system that you can put either a manual or you can also pre-wire for motorized shades. So if you have one tenant that wants a manual shade, you can put that in, or you can pre-wire it and you can easily just hook in a motorized shade for the next tenant. So what that does is it reduces the amount of debris, it reduces the amount of maintenance, it reduces, ripping out ceiling tiles, right? We're all connected here, right? And so that's one option. And so we like to say that we can make buildings automation ready. So what will happen is a developer can put in an automation backbone, get it ready for automation, but the tenant can choose what type of systems they want. So that modularity and flexibility is really important. When it comes to automation, we have different options. We have scalability, right? So if you have a space that is not, let's say, fully automation wired and automation ready, we have simple solutions for just a conference room, right? Where you can just put a daylight sensor in, or you can do a room, or you can do an entire building. We have different systems that are flexible for that reason, thinking about it long-term. You know, and then just, you know, looking at everything from a circular perspective, these principles of design for disassembly, designing for longevity, designing for maintenance. Those are just ingrained in how we design our systems since we have such long life cycles. And I think that's also extremely relevant to ensuring that we're building for adaptive reuse at the same time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I just want to build on that a little bit from the perspective of healthcare. There is a lot of renovation in healthcare as you know, new surgical techniques or equipment are developed, new imaging equipment needs to be changed out, things like that. But going back to the regulations, Avi, that the threshold is very high for products that come into a space in terms of performance and certifications, right? Warranties, all those things. But I wonder in another building typology, if a more developed secondary market is reasonable for product reuse, right? We do have some small, maybe probably local instances of that. I can think of a couple here in Atlanta that really specialize in a secondary market, but I wonder if that can be more expansive industry-wide. Maybe not in healthcare quite so quickly, but maybe more open, you know, kinds of or flexible kinds of building typologies like commercial interiors.
I'll just say, you know, there's been some movement on that. There's a effort from you know, building products ecosystems to recycle and reuse, to close the loop on wallboard, gypsum wallboard. You know, there is an effort to create a market for refurbished or second use furniture through various dealers across the country. I hear Seattle and some other places have some really great product and material depositories that are doing that. You know, it's a patchwork of efforts, but I mean, you're absolutely right. I think, you know, there's some sectors where it's possible, you know, to it's tougher to bring in, you know, reused or refurbished materials, but some sectors where it isn't. And, you know, we have to think across sectors when we think about reuse. So we can't think about, you know, healthcare products going back into healthcare spaces necessarily. They should go into whatever spaces will accept them and wherever they can still perform and be functional and useful and beautiful. And so, you know, that's an interesting, I think, question. And I think it's a place where industry needs more work. Avida, you were going to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to plug in to this discussion about, you know, really circular design, especially when it comes to corporate office interiors. We're finding that it's more and more important these days as we're designing to think of longevity and reusability, flexibility. And I really think, you know, it needs to go beyond just saying that we have cubicles that we could swap out for different types of cubicles, right? It needs to be, how do we swap out? How do we effectively recycle or reuse partition walls? How do we actually move these things around and create the least amount of waste possible? I know some tech companies currently are looking into these strategies for their office spaces, and they're really looking into the future of circular design. And creating that secondary market. I think that Eileen, you hit the nail on the head there. Is for there to be a secondary market, there needs to be policies that make it easy for us as designers and incentivize the owners to reuse materials. And currently, those policies don't exist currently. There's some attempts at it in Los Angeles that I see, but it's you know, it's if you for example recover certain demolition waste, you get some incentives in Los Angeles, but it's not quite enough for you to go down to the level of thinking, okay, I'll reuse this carpet or I'll reuse this drywall. And then again, going back to what I said earlier is, do you really want to reuse that carpet? I think that's our challenge right now, is we don't know what is in our buildings. So another thought I'd like to float out there, and this is just in terms of where I think we should be going, is really taking stock of the materials in our existing buildings and understanding what's in them. How can we start sort of creating that material bank of the materials that go into each building so that we know the exact makeup of that building? When we go into it, we know exactly where those products came from, which manufacturer they need to go back to, how to recycle it. So, and that's something that will take data, right? It's a matter of having that data and really starting to track that data as well, which I think we're actually starting to do that. You know, running, for example, life cycle analysis studies on our interior retrofit projects automatically requires us to take stock of the materials already there. It's a different level of information than what we would need for healthy materials and recycling materials, but we are starting to look at this whole building systems approach of the components inside a building. So we're making progress there, I think, but still a lot of ground to cover to become fully circular.
Yeah, and sorry to just jump in very quickly again. I see this question: can we also design with less materials? Great question. Yes. One of the challenges, the pushes and pulls of materials reuse and thinking about flexibility, you know, design for replanning, moving spaces around very quickly and easily, deconstructibility, is we don't want to sacrifice that the health and wellness aspects that we are working so hard for now. I'm specifically thinking of acoustics, right? We don't want to sacrifice those absorptive materials, you know, in favor of deconstructibility. So we have to think about ways that those fibrous and absorptive materials can be reused, even though those maybe are the more challenging materials to do that with.
Eileen, I was gonna jump in on that, because we've been hearing a lot about flexibility and exactly that, a point around acoustics. As people look to kind of future-proof a space, that'd be the best way to get longevity of the space. If you want that flexibility and you want to repurpose areas, you need to build in thinking about not just the thermal comfort or whatever, it's that acoustic comfort. And so you need certain types of materials in all surfaces, but inclusive of ceilings and walls. And one of the best ways in terms of reuse may be to look at making sure you can, if something's older, to your point, Avide, and you don't know what's in there, you know, in terms of that life cycle analysis, but you know that if, you know, can you take it back, recycle it, turn it into a new material that you know what the contents are, you know that it's a healthy, clean material, you know its footprint or its positive handprint, like our Tectum panels that are actually living future certified and part of kind of making a positive difference. It's balancing all these things, and I admire what you all do, because on the specification side you have so much information flowing in to try to make all those choices, to try to create that best environment that's like you fit for the future, that's flexible for the space. But materials are an important part, you know, reducing them to what's necessary, but it has to have the right feel, the right performance, and how it comes together. You know, we're on that journey with you, and we've made a lot of progress. We know we have ways to go, but our goal is making it simple. So if anybody on this call, I know HDR and ZGF are probably really familiar with what we have, but if anybody on this call needs help around the ceiling and wall side, industry-wide, we can help you with those parameters and metrics and make sure you're getting what you need to think about that component, because acoustics does matter. At the end of the day, particularly for health and wellness, people need to be in a lively space in some places, but they need to be in calm, inspiring, quiet spaces to do any kinds of work and healing as well, and learning.
Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you for that offer. Again, all of you have led me directly to my next question here. That acoustics that we've brought up now, and really you could substitute any major health metric in here, for that acoustics piece. But an interesting example, at the end of the last year, we published in Metropolis some research from LMN architects in the Carbon Leadership Forum around the carbon footprint of tenant improvement projects, interior renovation projects. And Avide, I know ZGF is working on that as well. And one of the sort of biggest sort of carbon offenders, so to speak, so biggest carbon footprint for biggest volume are partition walls and acoustic panels. And yet both of those things are absolutely essential for any kind of, human habitable space now, right? Especially within the existing buildings that we've built, maybe if we were to think of new construction where, it's all not glass and steel, and we find some revolutionary new construction technology, hello mass timber. But with the buildings that we have now, we cannot do away without some kind of acoustic surfacing, some kind of wall panels, and then of course, Rachel, some kind of daylight modulation, control, lighting sort of mechanism, right? So, and yet all of those are carbon intensive, and they have potential for toxicity, right? So how do we make those trade-offs? So I'd love to hear from all of you in your own work. How are you setting priorities? How are you finding hotspots, for you to act? Because, out of the hundreds of materials in a building and the, let's admit it, scores or hundreds of materials in product assemblies, how do you decide where you can make the most difference? And how do you work on some of those trade-offs, right? How do you decide that something is absolutely essential for the human experience of the space? And so maybe we need to find our carbon savings elsewhere. Maybe we need some other mitigation strategies. Maybe we need something else. So how are you currently taking those decisions?
Well, I can, start off just by saying that finding products that are multi-purpose are really important, that can play multiple roles in a space. So something with acoustics becoming more and more trackable and people needing calculations. So we've been testing all of our shade cloths for acoustic properties also. And so we have NRCs up to 0.6 actually for some of them. So, people are using shade cloths as partitions. They're using them in conference rooms, not just for daylighting tools, but also for sound absorption, for privacy. So you can use it for multiple facets, and they're also modular, so they can go up, they can go down. So you can use our product in multiple ways. I think that's really, just honing in on that acoustics portion is something that's interesting. But for us, just in terms of how we prioritize what's important, the number one thing we always talk about is occupancy comfort, because if the people aren't comfortable, and whatever comfort that may mean, there's many different types of comfort, right? It's a smell from off-gassing, it's glare, it's too much noise, whatever that may be. If the building isn't functioning properly, people will not want to be in the building itself. So that for us is how I would say, prioritize what's important when we're balancing all these different attributes of what a health and wellness means to just the industry in general. And we always want to ensure that, people first in terms of just what we're thinking about, but without disregarding everything else, of course. But we always just want to make sure that people are comfortable and happy. And we don't want them to know that we're doing things, right? That's the whole idea.
So I'll jump in here and mention that it is a challenge, especially with the amount of information that we have as designers when we're selecting materials. which piece of information do we prioritize, right? Is it planet health? Is it human health? Is it carbon emissions? Is it some other, aesthetic criteria, acoustic criteria, some other performance criteria? And it is quite a bit overwhelming. I think that's been the challenge, is deciphering all of this information in a way that enables us to make the right decisions on each of our projects. And I would say that it's really a case-by-case scenario. At ZGF, we're actually in the process of creating an internal guidebook, a materials playbook that we call, to guide designers through choosing the right types of materials and prioritizing the right things. I think what Bill referred to with the red to green list of materials, and it's just categories of materials, not specific products, but categories of materials. That's a very helpful way of looking at it. And we're really trying to develop a guideline like that so that we can have a quick hand tool to, okay, which product is going to meet my aesthetic requirements, my performance requirements, but also be healthier, but also be lower carbon footprint. And I would say that's continuously developing. We're just getting so much information continuously every day to this. That's another challenge, is keeping things up to date. Another thing is that at the same time, there are a lot of synergies between health, carbon, waste. And whenever we can hit those three all together at the same time, that's really a win-win-win scenario for us and for our clients. So whenever we can use materials that have less toxicity, less chemical content, but also probably have lower carbon emissions, then those are the materials that we will go with. And a lot of times it's not necessarily that it's going to cost the client more or cause more headaches for us on the design side. It's just a conscious decision and knowing when to make those decisions. So continuously working on that, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think the answer is yes, everything all at once together. We need to be working on, and it can be overwhelming. We have at HDR, we have sort of a broad swath of sustainability expertise, but also pockets of very deep and focused expertise in material health or carbon reduction or social equity, or what, all these different topics, whatever it is, and we need to be hitting them all. And similar to ZGF, I think our master specs are constantly being upgraded, reviewed and upgraded, and we're trying to lift all boats to the extent that we can, universally. Once a product or product family is basically universally available, then we incorporate it into our master specs, and little by little we're raising all boats. And then there are those individual projects that are individual clients that are extremely passionate about one or two areas, like social equity or carbon reduction, for example. And another might be just very passionate about material health. And there we'll really push the envelope, but we still have that sort of baseline performance resting on our master specs that hopefully across the board we've incorporated as much as we can universally available.
Yeah, I think absolutely, creating some kind of internal resource like that and then maintaining it is really, really important, and something that I think all firms need to, all practices, no matter the size of the firm, need to put some resources towards. And resources like Home Free, which I mentioned earlier, are really useful in terms of guidelines. If you're looking for carbon information, the Carbon Leadership Forum, at least for major building materials, not for all interior materials, has released baselines and updates them every year. So 2021 baselines are available now. So there is support and help out there with expertise for anyone listening who wants to kind of, start on this journey. I have a question here from Florence Chan. I think Avida and Eileen may be most appropriate for both of you, but I know that, Armstrong has been involved with the back end of this pledge as well. So if you have any insights, Sue, that would be great. Florence Chan asks, how do you align your project material health concerns and goals with the AIA Materials Pledge protocol, especially with social health and equity? So Florence is referring to the AIA A&D Materials Pledge, which if you haven't checked out, I strongly urge you to go and check out. It's just a Google search away, AIA A&D Materials Pledge. It's a new pledge developed, I think released just last year around, goals for material specification and product selection. Eileen and Avida, are you, if you are looking at the A&D Materials Pledge protocol, which I know both of your firms have been involved in developing, how are you doing that? And if not, if that's not, currently a driver within individual projects, I understand that even though it might be a firm-wide sort of goal, how are you looking at social health and equity through as part of your work on material health, on healthy buildings? How do you think about that equity piece? Avida, you mentioned this in your early comments. Eileen, you talked about it as well. If we can just circle back to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I can start off speaking to that. So the social health and equity part is a difficult one to wrap our heads around because the impacts go throughout. You have to trace it back to the supply chain. We're not just looking at the end user impacts. And what we've discovered is most effective is really to educate all of our staff, all of our designers on the impacts of individual material choices and social equity, social impact. So the way we're doing that is we've actually launched an education series, it's internal about materials, and it's the intersection, it's really exploring the intersection of materials and social equity. Within the past year, I think there's been a lot of talk about social equity, social justice with the Black Lives Movement, especially. And this is just another step at looking at how our work is impacting communities out there, how the materials that we're choosing are impacting communities out there, even though it may not be immediate to us or incredibly tangible to us as we're sitting in the office selecting these materials, that there are impacts that go beyond the realm of our office or our city, depending on where the product is coming from. So we took a cue from really the embodied carbon approach and what Architecture 2030 had set in terms of identifying high impact materials. They identified high impact materials for embodied carbon. We're going through a similar thing where we're identifying high impact materials in terms of social equity and material health. What are those top categories that we should absolutely try to replace? One of those for us on the top of our list is vinyl, is the use of vinyl and PVC in projects. It's really helping designers understand that, vinyl is produced through chlorine gas. Chlorine gas production is still the #1 and the only remaining use of asbestos in the country. Is huge. Most designers, most people out there think that asbestos has been banned already. We don't need to think about it anymore. It is still being used, and it's going directly into materials that we are producing in the United States, 70% of which is going towards the building industry specifically. And again, nodding back to Bill Walsh and the Healthy Building Network's research, which we rely on heavily to pull this data from, it's really just connecting the dots. So long-winded answer to your question is that we're really trying to achieve this through education, because as soon as somebody identifies, oh, this is the impact that I can have on communities, okay, I can start to look at not using luxury vinyl tile. Let's look at a different type of flooring. Let's not use PVC roofing. Let's look at a different type of roofing. And it comes down to simple choices like that. That's digestible, that's clear. And we're really trying to keep it high level right now, and then doing a deeper dive as we discover more information on supply chain and social equity to make more nuanced decisions.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, I think we're doing similarly, we're doing a lot of learning and education right now around the social impacts of our material choices, you know, both internally and also with our clients and with our vendors. So there's industry-wide a level of education that we're all, you know, trying to wrap our heads around. Also, high impact materials, agree. Things like chrome, you know, very inert in a space and non-toxic to an occupant, but the production and the chrome plating process is incredibly harmful to the workers. So we're asking a lot of questions around that. Anytime we're pitched a new material, we are asking questions about manufacturing processes, how they manage their waste streams, their waste flows, effluent, things like that. So it's a big conversation, and I think, you know, being more transparent about the topic and continuing to learn, I think is where we're at now.
I jump in briefly. I think just speaking from a manufacturer's perspective, you know, that AIA pledge really does go out to the design firms, but, you know, we're willing and ready to assist with the information you need to be transparent when you're looking at choices and specification, get you the information you need about how products are made, what materials are composed of. And we have commitments as a company. We'll be publishing our first sustainability report this July with a number of goals about where we're directed towards 2030, about not just products, which has been our central core and building on a foundation of our journey, but also people and planet. So when we think about social, you know, equity and justice, just really across the board, how we're looking at that to be a responsible player within the industry, products and beyond. So we stand ready to assist around that pledge as firms, as you all and those of you listening are looking for information to be able to specify with confidence and the transparency of the information you need.
So, you know, so I mentioned this earlier, but we just submitted, haven't got it back yet, but the Cradle version 4 beta standard, and they have really expanded that social requirement. And it's looking at your supply chain, it's looking at your communities, it's looking at your, you know, all different aspects of how your product is made. It's doing social hotspots. And so I think this is starting to get, you know, built out more and more. And, you know, I don't have all the answers for this, as a lot of people mentioned as well. we're still figuring out how to, you know, properly tackle this. But I do think that having some sort of standards and procedures from a manufacturer's perspective that I can go to my senior level, to my director of supply chain, to my director of HR, to may really connect those dots. That's kind of been the value for me of going through this V4 cradle to cradle process. So I just, you know, it's still in its infancy. It was just released, but I definitely think, you know, cradle to cradle is more than a material health tool. There is a huge social component to it that I think, you know, I'm really interested to see how it aligns with the AIA pledge as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. A quick question here, and Avide, maybe you should take this one. Lois asked, would we want to ask that manufacturers disclose information on energy and possible emissions in the recycling process? So while we're looking at recyclability, we have to understand that recycling also has carbon emissions associated with it. How are you thinking about that, Avide?
That is a great point. Yeah, I think part of that, if you're looking at, for example, EPDs and life cycle analysis, there is a stage in the life cycle analysis for recycling that actually does measure the impacts of energy intensity and carbon emissions from the recycling and end of life process. So there are some EPDs that will cover that stage and that range. I think that's the most accurate data I have seen on that end so far. I would certainly love to see more of that. I think at this point we're just getting the data on this, and wrapping our heads around it.
Yeah. So before we proceed, I don't usually do this, but I'd love to get on my soapbox for a second, if everyone will be patient with me, and say, that there's many ways that architects and designers and manufacturers, everybody in our industry, contractors, developers, everyone included, can make a huge difference to health outcomes. And we have seen the world turn to us for expertise during this global pandemic. There has been more coverage of indoor air quality, of indoor environmental quality, of of the impact that buildings can have in health this year than there has ever been, right? And so we're in this amazing moment where a lot of the decisions we take at a systems level, to bring us back to where Avide started us off, and at the conceptual level, at the analytical level, at the research level where Eileen was talking about, we have a huge impact we can make. But I just want to also talk, because we've spent so much time talking about it, the impact that we all can have at the product specification and product selection level, which the AIA Materials Pledge is really spot on in addressing, and that Bill spoke about in his address as well. Our research, through Metropolis's sister concern, FinClab, our research organization, says that, as architects and interior designers, especially in the commercial space, but also in the residential sector, might have 100 times or up to 400 times more purchasing power by volume and by dollars than individual consumers. So much as we try to make a difference as individuals in our own lives, the best place for us to direct our efforts, whether it's activism around climate change or climate justice, whether it's activism around social justice, is really through our professional sphere. It's through our professional ambit. We have way more power in our work as professionals than we do in our capacity as individuals. And that's especially true when it comes to social equity. We're used to thinking about social equity in political terms, and that is really important. Do what you need to do to support the communities you have to support. But at the same time, remember that you can also support them through the professional choices that you make. And that is something that we're really starting to understand. So it's really, really important for us to keep digging into that aspect. And all the panelists here have echoed this idea, right? That there's a lot we can do. Thank you all so much for the amazing insights you've shared with us today. For all of you in the audience, don't leave us yet. We have an amazing tool demonstration coming from Matter, which is a materials management platform. And when they speak to you, you will understand why it's really important to have a way to manage the assets on projects. It has implications for not just material health and material selection, but also for reuse and recycling and asset management in general. We'll hear about that in just a few minutes. But before we do that, a quick thank you again to our sponsors, Armstrong Ceilings and Wall Solutions, Carnegie, Dell Technologies, Formica, Mecho, and Tarkett for supporting today's discussion. A huge thank you to our panelists, Avide, Eileen, Rachel, and Sue, for all your insights today and for being so generous and thoughtful and really clear and pragmatic in your inputs today. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate everything that each of you does in your professional sphere. All of you play a huge role in making our society better, making our buildings healthier. And really, I thank you all for the effort and the time and the dedication and passion that you all put into it. I truly, truly appreciate it. Thanks also to everyone who's been listening to us so far. So we'll say bye to our panelists now. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time. And we will bring on Anna Walsh to do our demonstration of Matter. That'll be on in just a minute. So stick with us, please.
Everybody stick around for the Matter demo. It's great. We're using it. I'm a big fan. You're all going to love it.
Thanks so much, Eileen.
All right, shall I share my screen then?
Yes, please, Anna. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Eileen. That was a better intro than I could do. So hooray. Much appreciated. Just a quick check. I think you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
All right. So I I got too click happy. First and foremost, I'm Anna. I'm a business analyst with Giga. We're the company that creates the technology that powers a variety of different tools you may be familiar with. The most familiar with, or the most famous, I should say, thanks to some of these folks on the call, is Mindful Materials. That's powered by Origin, our larger database, and Matter is another product that we use and built. So this is a demo of Matter, and I'll say first and foremost, there is a free trial available. So everything that I show you here today is available in the free trial, and quite a lot of it is available in a free account. And if you'd like to start using that, you can simply go to matterbuild.com and log in with your Mindful Materials user password and log in. Or if you happen to have an origin.build account, that's essentially the same thing. So you can get in that way. And here we go. So Matter is a system that's built in order to help everyone on the call here take action on materials. So I'll get into what that means a little bit, but essentially if you're in your Mindful Materials library and you're finding product information, you might be jotting that information down on a piece of paper or making a note or taking a screen capture, but Matter is meant to be the place where you can do something with that information. So I'll go through kind of the exciting bits and then a little bit of the technical boring bits and save some time for Q&A at the end. So when you log into your Matter account, whether you're paying for it or just on the free trial, you'll see libraries on the left-hand side and projects on the right-hand side. So these are the two main components of the system. We have on the library side the ability to browse Origin, which is our main data hub. There are about 150,000 materials in this data hub that are supported by all of these awesome reporting bodies that we link into via API. So you can start searching on materials here via keyword or by clicking on advanced filters. And some of you are probably already familiar with this architecture, but we see it in Mindful Materials as well. You can look for VOC data, certifications and standards, search by brand, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Origin. So happily access Origin. Mindful Materials is actually here available in Matter as well. So you can go to mindfulmaterials.origin.build to capture what we see in the MM library, or you can actually do it here. It's all the same stuff. So you can see our 13,000 materials in that library that are hand vetted by volunteers. And this is the same exact information. So you can view things on Origin, you can view them on Mindful Materials, and then that question of, well, once I've found the information that I'm looking for based on my searches, what do I do with it? Comes up now. So in Matter, companies that participate have company libraries, and users that participate have individual personal libraries. And both of these can exist in tandem. So if I'm searching for a material and I come around to find it, let's say it's carpet tile, or it's something more interesting, I can click, select as many as I want, and I can then take action on those materials. Save them to a project, save them to a library, save them to my personal library. Moreover, I can compare those materials via some tools here on the top right-hand side. I'm actually going to do this a little bit later. We can add notes, add tags, change these materials, make them better, select a certain number of materials and export them to an Excel spreadsheet. So let's say that I select these materials and then I save them to my company library. Once I click over to my company library, I'll find that these materials are there for me to use, save, make notes on, etc. So the company library is pretty straightforward in so much as there is a materials folder section. There's a list of all the materials that you can see here in your library. And this is a shared view. So all the users in your system, all the people in your company are working together to put materials into this shared company library. And there's also some cool features which you're probably familiar with, and thanks to Mindful Materials, which is if you see a little M listed here, that means you can get a sample via material banks. So if I wanted to get a sample of this Mecho product right here, I could click this link and be taken to Material Bank for a sample. I can also add notes and tags. That was mentioned briefly, but here's a summary of that information. There's a status section here, which is meant to be used by what we call a company librarian. So someone here can, in the system in your company, can review these materials and approve them or reject them, add notes, add tags. And there's also 3 different views here. So this is our list view. The mindful materials view is also super useful if you want to see how materials stack up against what we call the mindful materials matrix on the right-hand side. So how they're performing in terms of colors or grayed out, meaning out of date information, and then across these multiple buckets on ingredients, environmental profile, VOCs, etc. We can get into this more deeply if folks have questions, but I'll save that for the end. And then lastly, there's a thumbnail view, so you can always just look at pictures if that's how you like to browse. And I opened that Mecho product that we can see here in detail. This detail page might look familiar if you're a mindful materials user. It's essentially the same thing. All of this populates from origin. What that means is Mecho has come into our system and given us all this great information. They've given us a description, product ID, a link to the product here, so we're never kind of lost. We always know where the material is. Where is it located? It's in a bunch of different cool libraries, et cetera, et cetera. So we know this material information is coming from the manufacturer because it says right there, Mecho's telling us where the information is coming from. We can order a sample, we can report data that we need to see updated, we can still take those actions on the material. So this is an excellent product listing. It includes what we call possible compliance. This is something that we curate internally. Essentially, it's a quick and dirty on if a certain product certification is found on the material and up to date, then a possible compliance with certain standards on the left-hand side. There's a scoring section, which I'll skip right now, but there's also this extra stuff that you don't get in Origin and Mindful Materials, i.e. notes, tags, and collaboration. Contacts is the same because here you can see that the contacts are pulling through from the manufacturer. So the manufacturer has given us this great information. But what's different is that in Matter, you can actually improve those contacts. So now that this is my material in my Matter system, in my company library, I can push that little edit button that I just pushed, and I can actually add contacts. So let's say that I have a local contact that I want to add. I can create a little CRM here for my materials across my system, and that's shared internally across the company. Similarly, I can add additional features. So Mecho's done a great job of listing a bunch of good features here, but there may be more that I want to add. For example, is it designed for disassembly? Does it have a warranty that relates to how I use the product? Is there regional availability here in my region? This is kind of specific to me and my company and how we use this product, so we can improve it. We'll go back to the view. And at the bottom, you'll see all that good information listed once more. And on top of that, the certifications, declarations, and test reports. So for those folks who are maybe new to this information or new to this system, I'd stop and say that we know that the data source of this information is Mecho because they have disclosed it to us. We also know that the data source of this information is GBCI because they've come into the system and added that information on top of the material. So we have a really robust, transparent way of tracking which information comes from whom. And actually, if we were to go ahead and edit this material and add information, then that data source would track it as well. We would see that the data source comes from my company. I'm the architect or the designer who improved that information, and it's going to tell me so. So when my partner or my teammate is looking at this information, and let's say another image is added, it's going to say it came from me and not from Mecho. So in that way, we can have really clear information, and everybody knows where it's coming from, and we can update it as a team. Okay. So I'll save questions until the end, but I'm going to get into just very briefly the compare tool that I mentioned at the beginning. So let's say I want to take action on an item. We talked about how I can select materials and save them to projects, save them to libraries. I can compare as well. So if I were to take, let's say, a couple different materials across probably one category. Let's see if we can find some. Let's just compare these materials here. So I selected these 3 different materials that are all kind of similar, and I want to see how they stack up. So I'm going to go to compare material details. What's going to happen is the system's going to put side by side these materials that are selected and allow me to essentially go down all the details one by one and see how they stack up. These materials are super similar. I skipped over that scoring section. We can come back in a Q&A if necessary, but pretty quickly I can see that there's some differing information here. For example, this lead credit is applicable on one, not two, not three of them. So maybe that suits my fancy. I'm prioritizing lead. I'll take a closer look at this material. Kind of down on the line, if clean air gold is something that I'm really interested in, then we can see pretty quickly that I want to look at this middle material and not the other two. So this compare feature hopefully is of use to everybody on the call. It's supposed to help you make quick and dirty decisions of opening a bunch of different tabs to compare information. Okay, so in addition to the functionalities that I've already kind of talked about, we have projects and we have the ability to put materials into projects and the ability to export lists of materials from that data. So here I just clicked into a quick project. It's a demo project and it has the same kind of architecture in the sense that it has folders. These folders are open-ended. We call them spaces, but you can use them as you see fit. It has the same kind of tagging and status information that's pulling from the company library. All those edits that have been made on the material across from the teammates are all going to show up here because it's still in my Matter company library. In addition, there's basic information on the project, team members who have control over the project information. So a project manager who has control over the read, write, and read-only access on this project. Read, write in this case meaning folks who can change materials and their information and where they live. Quick and dirty file section in case you want to add different types of files on this project for archival purposes or because it's actively in use. And then of course, all the materials. So mostly this feature right now is in beta, but the intention here is that it would be useful for a company to input all of the materials that they're using in a given project, decorate, we say, or edit up those materials to include all the information that's necessary to kind of archive, and then be able to go back and see what you've done in past projects and replicate those moving forward. Change the materials that you've specified, kind of improve as you move forward. So that's the basic intent of projects at this moment. And I would pause here and say that I did mention that projects is in beta, and that's for a reason. So if there are different functions and features that you want to see in this, I am definitely the person to take that feedback. So if it isn't already shared in the current meeting, I will definitely share that information with everybody on the call via our hosts. Okay, so here we have, I just quickly selected 20 of the top materials in my project. And I wanted to show everybody on the call that you can take those materials and export them to an Excel spreadsheet. This might be useful for a variety of reasons. Hopefully that's self-evident, but you might want to manipulate the data elsewhere. You might be submitting to lead, a variety of other reasons why you might want to export this data. And as this opens, you'll see that the material information that comes through this export, here we go, is all the same good stuff that you're going to see in a material detail page. So all the certification information, all the basic information, and what's better is it's going to give you clickable links that will take you back to those product listing pages so you can see those things live. Even more, it's going to take you directly to the linked, let's say, for example, declare label for that product. Okay, so in this moment, I've covered most of the good big pieces of the Matter system, i.e. libraries and projects, how you can manipulate materials, how you can improve them, and how you may get them in or out of the system through exporting. I mentioned briefly at the beginning that a person, i.e. a single user, has access to a personal library as well. You can find that under My Material Library. It's one of your libraries on the left-hand side. And this is like a workspace for you. Essentially, you can save materials into this location, change them, edit them, rank them, tag them. And then maybe at the end of the day, once you've compared a few materials and decided that this table is the one you want to use, you can save it to your company library. If you're not the librarian or the admin, once you do that, the librarian or the admin will have the ability to review that submission and say, yeah, we agree, or hey, we need to make some more notes on this. Additionally, you may find that when you're searching origin or mindful materials, you don't come across that product that you're looking for. Maybe it's because the manufacturer hasn't engaged with us yet. That's okay. That's going to be the case some of the time. We've built the ability for you to create that material as well. So if you click manage and then create material, you'll be able to go through the simple process of just uploading very basic information, which will allow you to, I'm creating a test material here, allow you to create materials on the system, and then you own them. So you can add a contact. Let's say you have a wood table manufacturer down the street who you use in every single project. That's awesome. You can put Susie and John's name in here and save their information. So you can automatically save it to the library or to a project. Just create this material quickly. And we've created material. And once we've done that, we can go back to the material we've created and see that we just have the most basic information on it. But through this edit feature, we can edit up all the fields that we would see in a normal material, from basic information all the way down to certifications, declarations, and test reports. So in this way, we've covered a little bit of the custom side, a little bit of the side where we want to see more material information in the entire ecosystem, but we haven't got it yet, and the ability to go search in those libraries that exist. I'll note as well that it is possible for us to see the contact information if you give us permission. So we can set up a situation with your company where instead of creating a material and hoping that the manufacturer just engages, we can facilitate that engagement, i.e. reach out to them and say, hey, Anna created your material on Matter, which is part of the Origin and Mindful Materials ecosystem. Let's see if you can come in and improve it for them, right? Create that manufacturer data points that we want to see on those materials. And in that way, we can get the number of products here available for you even larger. Okay, so I'll take a break here and ask for questions. And hopefully that was clear enough, but please shoot away.
Thank you so much, Anna. Matter is such a powerful platform. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Anybody in the audience who has questions, please put them into the Q&A tab. I have a question for you, Anna, while we wait for questions from the audience. So of course, it's amazing that you can create a material that's not yet in the Origin database or not yet in Mindful Materials, and kind of put in that information. There's also many ways where, people from within a company or individuals can make notes or tags or edits to materials. What is the relationship between, if you've made some notes on a material or you've added in a material and those sort of public databases like Origin or Mindful Materials, as in how proprietary or private does your sort of notes or internal company kind of information or notation or ranking on products remain?
That's a great question. So without getting into the technical parts of it, we can think of Origin as the original and Matter as a copy. So there are parts of the system that pull through. So here on this Mecho product, for example, because it's his manufacturer, I'm getting that data directly from the Origin source. So, and if I were to push edit here, I wouldn't be able to update the URL because the manufacturer has given us that information, and we're gonna assume that that's gold. That's better than any information that I'm gonna put in there. But if, for example, Mecho had not added a URL link here, then when I clicked edit, that would be an open field for me to add information in. And in that way, we can build upon what the manufacturer has already given us on this copy of that information. So to answer your question specifically, if I were to go in as a Matter user and update this URL, it would say that the data source is me, and that data would not go back to the Origin Data Hub. So it would remain on my copy of this material in my company library. the folks in my company library who have permissions and who have viewing permissions would be able to see that URL, but no one outside of that company would be able to.
That's fantastic, especially as we heard from both Avide and Eileen today about how a lot of firms are developing internal expertise, ranking systems, master spec lists, and things like that. So it's really important that each firm is also able to maintain their unique perspective on material selection and specification. We have one more question here. John Fallon says, can you access and/or download manufacturer's product information like CSI specifications, data sheets, or brochures from the program?
Great question. Two answers. The first is that this URL link is a great example. It will take you to the page the manufacturer has designated as the most useful or the most robust. So that'll always be there for you to go back and kind of go back to the original source from the manufacturer. There is also, it's not on this material, but there is also a section at the bottom that allows for uploads of BIM certifications, so BIM documents, additional specs, additional brochures. So that is available in the system. It's dependent on either the manufacturer uploading that data or you as a user adding it on because you have it in your system and you want to decorate that material and include it for your company. So that is a section that you'll be able to see on some materials at the bottom.
And I have a quick question. As a user, I mentioned that HDR uses this, and we love the functionality, particularly of being able to curate projects and project material libraries. I wonder if you have the ability to copy out an entire project and sort of rename it so that it could become a new project that has the basis of the original. Does that make sense?
Eileen, do you mean duplicate a project?
Yes, thank you.
We could make that happen. There's not a button that says duplicate anywhere on a material or project today, but that is an excellent suggestion that we could make happen.
Thank you. We have clients that, repeat clients, and they sort of have standards that evolve, like ours evolve. But if we could copy out the most recent project that we did with them as a starting place for our next project with them, that would be extremely helpful.
And Eileen, you've just demoed exactly the type of feedback that I'm looking for when we're talking about this being in beta. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Love it.
Love it too. Thank you so much, Anna, for this demonstration. Thank you again to all our panelists for joining us. And thank you to all of you listening in for joining us for today's session. Just a reminder, we have another session just like this tomorrow. We're talking about understanding the whole life impact of buildings and interiors, a wonderful topic, and really that will build on the information that you've heard over the last couple of days. We have a fantastic group of panelists there. Our keynote speaker tomorrow is going to be Rachel Hodgson, who is the CEO of the International Well Building Institute and the president of the International Well Building Institute. It's going to be a fantastic session. I hope you will join us. We're going to conclude that session with a demonstration of Tally, which is one of the foremost lifecycle analysis tools available to us today, a tool that just went open source. So you're going to hear more news about that and integration with EC3, which is a fantastic embodied carbon tool as well. So lots of great stuff tomorrow. Join us same time. If you haven't registered, of course, the registration link is in chat. Go ahead and register for tomorrow's event. I hope we will see you there. As always, as we have said a couple of times, recordings of these sessions will be available soon. It will be rebroadcast on Design TV by Sanda over the next couple of weeks, and also available for on-demand viewing on metropolismag.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I hope we see you again tomorrow. Have a great evening. Thank you.